Rise of Ronin, the game that looks very similar to many other open world games. However, in fact, it is neither of them. Sekiro, Ghost of Tsushima, Dark Souls, Assassin's Creed, the game looks very similar to them and takes a lot of elements from them. However, it does not fall into this category of blind copies of these games. More than that, the game is not even another Assassin's Creed. However, at a first glance, it may look like that. In fact, I think the best definition for such a game is a well-made Frankenstein, because apparently it manages to combine all the well-made elements from the aforementioned games in a very, I would say, unirritating manner, such that it makes a surprisingly good game. And today I'll try to explain why it is like that. As you probably have already guessed, the game takes place in Japan. However, this is not the Japan that everybody thinks of when they hear about samurais and ronins. This is a very different Japan. The Japan from the second part of the 19th century, when the country was going through a very hard period of self-re-identification. This was a period when a very closed, traditional and isolated country was opening to the world and basically redefining itself as there was a new future in front of it. The game focuses on showing how hard it was for such a delicate and exquisite country to go through this period full of controversy and contradictions when it was clear that the former way of living is not relevant anymore. However, future is not that clear. It shows that there were completely different opinions and completely different people involved. For example, there were traditional people who cannot imagine their life connected to foreigners. At the same time, there were people who were very open to foreigners and are already using their technologies. There are also people in between who understand there is no way to live in the past. However, the upcoming future, are not that bright for them as well. And I would say it is quite interesting to look at, because I don't really know a lot of works dedicated to this period. The only thing that comes to my mind is The Last Samurai, just an amazing movie with Tom Cruise, because it shows more or less the same period and discusses more or less the same problems. Besides that, nothing else comes to my mind. So speaking about the plot, the story focuses on showing a few years from that period and the political events that took place during that time. And let's put it straight, the storyline with the twin does not mean here anything. Well, it is here just to drive the story forward. This is the only purpose it is here for. The real focus, the real accent and emphasis of the game is discussing the history and the political events of Japan at that period. And from my perspective, the game does a pretty good job here, because first of all, there are a lot of historical figures, and I hadn't realized that in first place, but when I decided to Google one of the historical figures, it appeared that each of the single character that you see in the game are some historical character that played some role in the history of Japan of that period. Second thing is history and how it is shown here. The developers are Japanese, Team Ninja. And the interesting thing is that how critical they look at their history. The most important thing here is that story writers are not afraid of looking at the history of their own country at different perspectives and showing its darkest corners. One of the main topics of the game is violence and what a huge role it played in the history of Japan. And story writers are not afraid of showing that some events and some decisions might not work that very right, considering amount of violence and blood it brought. There are a lot of thoughts, and I'd say that the game generally insinuates in this opinion that it's almost always better to give it a second thought and not overreact to some event. Generally, the concept and the topic of compromise is very important in this story, perhaps as in that period when it was clear that it is very important to find a compromise between the past and the future, and the game makes a huge emphasis on that. Though I must say that the story is not ideal, and there are certain issues with it, and probably the main one is that it is too long and there are too many characters in it. What I mean is the pace of the story. The problem is there are so many events and there are so many characters. I clearly see such a huge desire to put as much content as possible. However, what it led to is basically me getting lost in all the events and in all the characters at the second part of the game. At some point, I found myself in a situation when I don't really know who the characters are referring to because there are so many characters. And I would say they are not very revealed, we don't really know who they are. More than that, it looks even more clumsy on the gameplay part with the concept of bond, where it's very important to establish relationship with different characters. But the funny thing is, you establish the connection with all the characters. However, you may not even know their story at all. You may not know them at all. You may have a high level of bondness with a character, but not really knowing a character at all. In addition, it looks funny that you cannot decrease your level of connection, you can only improve your relationship. During the game, it would often happen that you would fight characters that you had met before. However, it would never decrease your level of bondness, at least it didn't happen to me. No matter what you do, no matter what faction or what side you choose, you would never destroy your relationship, and you may later come to a character that you had a fight before, and just continue relationship with them and complete missions with them. Perhaps it was made in a favor of the gameplay, just to show the story and to add as much missions as possible. And with all this emphasis on the bond between the characters, it just looks silly because, well, you basically fight people who you have high connection with and you cannot decrease this connection. But again, I understand why such a compromise was made and probably we can live with it. A part where I cannot complain about the abundance of content is design and style. The only thing that can describe this part is love and amount of effort that designers put into this game. Despite not the best technical quality and at some places even poor quality, the game looks, sounds and feels the way it should. I don't know if this is the case always with the Japanese aesthetics, but the spirit of the era is conveyed brilliantly. The architecture, the design of buildings, the design of temples, of many different small Japanese things, all that looks incredibly beautiful. I see a huge genuine desire from artists to show how beautiful their country is, showing all the small elements of culture. For example, the characters would always take their shoes off before entering a building. Pleasure districts play a huge role in the game, as well as geishas, and the game shows that a lot of important events took place in the pleasure districts and how important it is for the culture of the country. Cats as collectibles and Akita dogs that you can interact with, and many other different things that I probably have already forgot, but the general emotion that I experienced is a huge desire to show how beautiful the country is and how much love the designers have for it and for its culture. Another important visual part of the game is the power of contrast, and what I mean is the rural areas are way different from the urban ones. The villages look very similar to the way they looked a few centuries ago, pretty traditional ones. However, when you take a look at cities, this is such a huge contrast. Next to traditional Japanese buildings, there are huge buildings of Europeans with different architecture. You may see Japanese selling traditional Japanese stuff in stores, and at the same time, huge steam ships that they call black ships are in the bay. And there are a lot of such elements that show that Japan was in a very interesting period, with many different elements colliding and forming the Japan that we know today. There are characters who wear traditional samurai armor, and at the same time, there are characters who wear tuxedos of Europeans, and it's all in the same game and it's all in the same city, and this is just amazing to look at. Sometimes being in Edo or in Yokohama, you see so many Europeans that you feel like being in Boston or in London from Assassin's Creed. And it shows how interesting it was because in a traditional closed country came a lot of foreigners. And the game perfectly understands its beauty because it always would give you a beautiful sunset or a beautiful landscape to look at. One of the collectibles in the game are photos that you take, and usually these are photos of beautiful views or of beautiful temples. The game basically presents you the country, it shows how beautiful it is. I don't know, maybe I'm biased and I like everything that has Japanese aesthetic, but not that many things can convey these emotions of riding on a horse across a field of high grass with a picturesque sunset in the sky. Alright, the main thing I'm making this video, the main course of today's dinner is the combat. Without further ado and all the additional words, this is just the best part of the game. It is so sweet and so enjoying that probably this is the only reason why I spent that many hours in the game. The thing is, the combat system is taken from Sekiro. However, it is way easier just to facilitate for the mass players. However, it's not that simple as in Assassin's Creed, where you feel that not you playing the game, but the game just plays and you are clicking the animations. Here, the challenge is present, and I'd say it is on a pretty high level. It took me 2 evenings to get through a first boss. I was just astounded how hard it is. Of course, the more you play, the more you learn, and probably this is the best thing to say about the combat system. Similarly to Dark Souls to Sekiro, the best part of combat is learning and overcoming the challenge. The game is not about smashing the attack button, but instead it is about patience, about studying your enemy's moveset, about understanding their attacks. It focuses on parrying and on balance, similarly to Sekiro. And it is so interesting, it is so enjoying. The sounds are so delightful. Honestly, I couldn't get off it. I was just so into playing and having more and more fights, because the more you learn, the more you understand the game, the more beautiful it looks like. You jump into a fight, you parry a few blows, you dodge it, then you start attacking, and it looks just beautiful. You can feel every hit, every blow, every parrying, every dodge, every counterattack, and it feels so delightful. I just couldn't get off it. Perhaps the most interesting fights are the story ones, because you fight against real samurais, and they have such a complicated moveset. They move so fast, and they have such a strong attacks, but at the same time, it's so interesting, because at some point you start understand them, and it just looks as a bloody dance of death, with each of you making strong hits and parrying each other. And again, you understand that it is you winning the fight. You can easily die here, but once you learn, once you master the skill, you would get the pleasure from the overcoming the challenge. And I think I'm not an expert in From Software games, but I feel like it is a great entry to it, because it focuses on respecting the combat and respecting your enemy, on learning to be patient and knowing where to dodge and when to attack. I think it is ideal for such a game, not being as simple as Assassin's Creed, but at the same time not being that demoralizing as Sekiro, just being in this condition of being concentrated and focused on the fight. Perhaps the only problem with that, which actually was not a problem for me, but I can imagine it can be an issue for some people, that gameplay-wise, there is nothing but just fighting. What I mean is, the game understands that the main part of it is combat, so there is nothing else gameplay-wise. You can do nothing but fight. Every mission, every story, everything will end up with a fight. One of the things that I mentioned in the beginning of the game is the fact that it is not irritating. What I mean is, the game is really convenient. And let me start from a bit different angle. Every time a new Dark Souls game arrives, I can hear a great number of complaints from the fans, saying that the game is not that hard anymore, now it's not challenging, it's easy, and blah blah blah. And the thing that I want to say is they are wrong, because the games are not becoming easy. In fact, they are the same. The thing that changes is the fact of them becoming more convenient. And the rise of Ronin is a great example how to make a lot of irritating moments in a game convenient. In most cases, the game have a lot of irritating elements removed that would potentially slow a player just from enjoying the game. Of course, there are games like Red Dead Redemption 2 and Death Stranding that make an emphasis on the slow gameplay. But in such a game, there is no need for that, and I really like that the game does not care about it at all. It really suits it to be fast and quick. So you're really fast with riding, flying, generally traveling across the world, with collecting items and doing most of the things. For example, once you're riding a horse, you can easily jump and start flying. Another way around, you can just jump on a horse right from the sky. This is so convenient and fast and swift and does not take a lot of time. You don't need to get off the horse to pick up items, just click the buttons and everything is going to be picked up just right on the fly. All the items are collected from the defeated enemies once you clear the area. You don't need later on to run around and pick up all the weapons and see what you got. Speaking about the items, I think there should have been a better method to manage all of that. For example, I have no idea why they added unlimited inventory, but at the same time, once you pick up a better item, the game will always show you that. One of the things that I really liked is the fact that you can wear clothes no matter how good they are. What I mean is, once you find a better item, you don't need to wear it visually. If you don't like how the item looks like, but the stats are pretty good, you can just use the stats of the item and wear the clothes you like. This is so good and this is so cool, and I've never thought that you can do that in games. As well as some smaller things. For example, you can set up to 5 markers on the map. Yeah, this is such a small detail, but it's so convenient. And all of that adds up on a feeling that the game is really swift and quick, and that it does not hold you back and does not make you focus on many irritating things that usually are present in the open world games. So, as you can probably hear, I have a pretty positive impression from the game. Maybe not ideal, but the game managed to, I would say, surprise me, because most of the elements here are made in such a good and proper way that it only makes you play more and brings you pleasure. The main core part of the game, combat, is made very well and brings a lot of pleasure. And all that happens in a very beautiful, picturesque world. There is a new Assassin's Creed Shadows coming next year that is going to be in the setting of Japan. And I can hardly imagine that this game would be able to compete with Rise of Ronin. And probably this is just my experience speaking, knowing that usually Assassin's Creed games are beautiful, but in fact are empty inside. Apparently, what is required for an interesting game is not to treat your audience as stupid idiots. Adding a challenge is not always bad, and it also can capture mass audience. The need to learn and to overcome challenges is very interesting, and it really makes you feel that you are playing the game, not something else. Pressure builds pressure.